So today we begin the discussion on the 14th chapter of the Bhagavad-Geeta. And here on we discuss the role of the Gunas of Prakriti. To understand Bhagavad-Gita is often a complex feat. It's a complex feat because everyone gives their own interpretation of Bhagavad-Gita. Few people, very few people, explain that the Bhagavad-Gita is a syncretic fusion of the six darshanas of the Vedas. And the six darshanas of the Vedas are integrated, they're synthesized, they're syncretized in this Bhagavad Gita. And if you don't understand this, and if you think this is only about Vedanta or only about this or that, you're going to be confused. The central point of the Bhagavad Gita is always Krishna, because this is a seminal Vaishnav text which gives the philosophy of Bhagavad Marg. And this central philosophy of Bhagavad Marg is focused on the performance of dharma. Yes, moksha also comes in. But essentially, Krishna says, Yada yada hi dharmasya. He doesn't say Yada yada hi mokshasya. So it's very important to Krishna, who is speaking the Bhagavad Gita, that each of us perform our dharma, our swadharma. Now, up till the 13th chapter of the Bhagavad Gita, we have discussed the complex layering of Sankhya and Vedanta. And now, when we come into the 14th chapter of the Bhagavad Gita, we start dealing with plainly Sankhya and Bhakti. Sankhya declares that Prakriti is divided into three gunas: Sattva guna, Raja guna, and Tamaguna. These three gunas in their natural state, as part of the Mahat, are simply perfect. There are simply three different ways in which Prakriti functions. Krishna describes in the 14th chapter of the Bhagavad Gita that Purush and Prakriti are the two dual factors that are there in Sankhya. And Krishna declares in this 14th chapter of the Bhagavad Gita, which I have discussed 14.3 to 14.4, I have discussed that this Prakriti is impregnated by Purush. Purush is pure consciousness. Pure Purush represents Bhagavan. Purush is the superior energy of Bhagavan. Prakriti is also his divine energy, Daivi Asaguna Mahi. But even though it is his divine energy, it is Bhinna Prakriti. It is part of his separated inferior energies. So Sankhya begins with Purusha impregnating the Prakriti. And by impregnating the Prakriti, Krishna creates innumerable living entities who are mini Purushas, infinitesimal Purushas, with an envelope of Prakriti. This envelope and this Purush are actually separate, even though they are contained within each other. Krishna points out in 13th chapter, which we discussed, Yatha sarvagatam sokshma dakasham na palipyate sarvatra avastito dehe tathatma napalipyate. Just like space contains the sky, and just like the sky contains space, and yet they do not mix with each other, so also the Prakriti contains the Purush, they do not mix with each other. Now that you have this understanding, you should also know from studying the 13th chapter of the Bhagavad-Geeta with me that along with this Purush, there is indeed a Paramatma. So you have a Purush and you have a Paramatma. This mini Purush, that is you, the Kshetrajna, the knower of the field, is in this Prakriti envelope with the Supreme Purush, with indeed the Sarva Kshetrajna. You know what happens within your field of Prakriti, but the Sarva Kshetrajna knows what is happening everywhere. So he is Purushottama, he is Paramatma. So in the 14th chapter of the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna declares, Idam jnanam upashritya mama sadharmyam agatah sarge api nopajayante pralaye na vyatanti cha. Those who take refuge in this wisdom will be united with me. They will not be reborn at the time of creation nor destroyed at the time of dissolution. So very clearly Krishna explains that I am declaring to you the supreme wisdom, the supreme knowledge, and the best of all knowledge, knowing which all the sages have attained perfection. And he goes on to say that by becoming fixed in this knowledge, you can attain to this transcendental nature, which is like my own nature. And thus established one is not born at the time of creation nor disturbed at the time of dissolution. So these two verses, 14.3 and 14.4, I have already discussed when we did the 13th chapter, because I felt it was essential to understanding the 13th chapter as well. Mama yonir mahad brahma tasmin garbham dadhamyaham sambhava sarva bhutanam tato bhavati bharatah. This material substance which is known as Mahat is my womb. This Mahat, which is the inchoate, unmanifest Prakriti, is nothing but my womb. It is my womb. This Prakriti is my womb. And I impregnate it with individual souls. And thus all living beings are born. O son of Kunti, for all species of life that are produced, material nature is the womb, and I, Krishna says, am the seed-giving father. Having said this, now Krishna begins to explain that this Prakriti which he has impregnated is composed of none other than the three Gunas, Sattva, Rajas, and Tamas. Sattvam, Rajas, Tamas iti Guna Prakriti Sambhavaha Nibbadhananti Mahabhao Dehe Dehinam Avyayam. Material nature or Prakriti consists of the three gunas, of the three modes: goodness, passion, and ignorance. Sattva, Rajas, and Tamas. And when the living entity, when the Kshetrajna, when the Jivatma, when the individual Purush, the infinitesimal individual Purush, comes in contact with nature, he becomes conditioned by these modes. Before we go on to understand Prakriti further, before we go on to discuss Sattva, Rajas, and Tamas, I would first like to explain to you that the problem is not with Prakriti. The problem is not with the three gunas of Sattva, Rajas, and Tamas. They're all perfect and all of them manifest appropriately at the right time under the instructions and guidance and control of Bhagavan. Krishna points out in the Bhagavad-Geeta that he does not want the individual Purush, the Jivatma, the Kshetrajna, to become misidentified with Prakriti. Right in the second chapter, he says, Nishtraigunya Bhavarjuna, do not get involved with these three gunas. Rise above these three gunas. Nirdvandva nitya sattvasto niryoga kshematvavan. Rise above Prakriti. He's telling you right from the beginning, rise above Prakriti. This Prakriti, Krishna says, is his divine energy. Daiviya saguna mai. It is his superior energy. And you are composed of both superior and inferior energy. This is explained in the Bhagavad-Geeta where Krishna says, Bhumi apo nalo vayur kham mano buddhirevacha ahankara ityam me bhinna prakriti ashtada. Earth, water, fire, air, ether, mind, intelligence, and your false ego, all of these belong to that Prakriti. But you, the Purush, the Kshetrajna, the Jivatma are separate and distinct and different. Aparayam itastva anyam prakritim vidhi me param jiva bhutam mahabhao yayedam dharyate jagat. You are part of my superior energy. And having become part of my superior energy, you are sustaining and maintaining creation. Be very clear. Not just your body, but also your mind, also your intelligence, also your false ego, which you think you are, all of them are part of Prakriti. They're all part of Krishna's Bhinna Prakriti, the inferior energy. You, the Kshetrajna, the Jivatma, the individual Purush, the infinitesimal Purush, actually are part of God's superior energy. You're sustaining and maintaining creation. Having understood this, understand that this Prakriti is entirely functioning under Krishna's direction. Not only is it his inferior energy, but Prakriti is essentially working under Krishna's direction. In the Bhagavad-Geeta, Krishna says, Mayadhyakshena prakriti suyate sa characharam hetunanena kaunteya jagad viparivartate. He says, I am the controller, I am the adhyaksh. I drive Prakriti. Mayadhyakshena prakriti. He is the adhyaksh, he is the administrator, the controller, the director of Prakriti. Because this Prakriti is none other than his divine energy. Daiviya sagunamayi. Now you have to understand that since you are infinitesimal, you can only be an observer of this energy. If you have attended the 13th chapter with me so far, you will know that in the 13th chapter, Krishna makes very clear that the Kshetrajna, the Jivatma, the individual Purush, he does nothing Everything is being performed by Prakriti. Nature, material nature performs everything. And as I have pointed out to you, this material nature functions entirely under Krishna's direction. You are only the observer. Everything happens through Prakriti, which is directed by God. If you try to struggle against this Prakriti, you're trying to control your mind, you're trying to control your senses, you're trying to struggle with Prakriti within this world, you will only know suffering because you are only an infinitesimal part of God. This is explained within the Bhagavad-Gita where Krishna says, Mamaivanso jiva loke jiva bhut sanatana mana shasta indriyani prakriti sthani karshati. You are but a fragment of me, an infinitesimal fragment of me. And you are struggling with your six senses that include your mind. You cannot overcome this Prakriti. Don't fool yourself that you can control this mind and the senses. They're all controlled by Krishna. You do nothing, you are only the observer. And if you try to struggle against your mind and your senses, you will only know suffering. Therefore, Krishna says, Daivi yasagunamai mama maya duratyaya. Mameva ye prapadyante mayam etam tarantite. But he says, if you surrender unto me, to Krishna, if you surrender unto Krishna, you can cross beyond this Prakriti, which is my divine energy. So your job is not to struggle with Prakriti. Your job is to surrender to Krishna and let Krishna handle your Prakriti. Foolish people think they are the doers. They think they are doing, they are thinking, they are managing the world. But indeed, Krishna says, Prakriti kriyamanani gunai karmani sarvashah ahankara vimudatma kartaham iti manyate. Everything is being performed by Prakriti. And it is the foolish living entity who imagines he is the doer of these activities. Because of this misidentification, he enjoys and he suffers. Daivya gunamai mama maya duratyaya mam eva ye prapadyante mayamitam tarantite. You have to learn to surrender to Krishna. And when you surrender to Krishna, you will be able to cross beyond Prakriti. But if you think that you are Prakriti, if you think that you are controlling Prakriti, you will be suffering. Karya karanam kartritve hetur prakriti uchyate. Purusha sukha dukhanam bhoktritva hetur uchyate. Prakriti does everything, but the foolish living entity, the foolish Kshetrajna, the Jivatma, the Purush, infinitesimal Purush, he thinks he is the doer and therefore he enjoys and he suffers. Purusha prakriti sthohi bhunte prakriti jan gunan karanam guna sangasya sadasad yoni janmasu. And because of this misidentification, because of this Purush thinking that he is Prakriti, he accompanies this Prakriti birth after birth, birth after birth, and he remains trapped in the cycle of birth and death. And thus he moves from one life to another, sometimes associated with good Prakriti, sometimes with bad Prakriti. Sometimes he suffers, sometimes he enjoys. But by itself, Prakriti is perfect. One, it is controlled by Bhagavan, Krishna, Mayadhyakshena Prakriti. So therefore, whatever is controlled by Bhagavan is perfect. On the other hand, these three gunas are also perfect. Each of these gunas have a function, and each of these gunas automatically move from one guna to the other. There is constantly a movement within this Prakriti. Sometimes Sattvagun predominates, sometimes Rajagun predominates, sometimes Tamagun predominates. Let us understand why they are perfect. Each of them serves a function. Tamagun is that guna when free of misidentification with Purush. This tamaguna is absolutely necessary for rest, sleep, recuperation, and rejuvenation. When in the evening the individual yawns and begins to stretch himself, when he is feeling drowsy and when he is feeling sleepy, this is tamaguna. It is a signal from Prakriti that it needs to rest, to sleep, to recuperate, to rejuvenate. Rajaguna is also a perfect guna. And it is perfect in the sense that it activates all the karmindriyas. It activates all the karmindriyas. Your hands, your legs, your genitals, everything becomes activated. It becomes activated because it is necessary for Prakriti to engage in certain functions within the world for which it was created. It is necessary for this Prakriti to perform the Swadharma, the purpose of the creation of this particular type of Prakriti. So to perform action, Rajagun is absolutely essential. Then we come to Sattva-guna. Sattva-guna is that guna wherein the Jnana Indriyas become activated. That is, your hearing, your seeing, all your Jnana Indriyas from which you receive information about the world, from which you receive knowledge, all of these Jnana Indriyas are activated when you are in Sattva Gun. When all the 9 gates of the bodies are illumined with light, that is Sattva Guna. And this Sattva Guna brings about harmony. It brings about peace. It brings about openness to knowledge. Indeed, it even brings about happiness. Look at a car. If you are having a car which is an automatic transmission, if you have an automobile which is an automatic transmission, you have a park which you put your car in when you are parking the car. When you are climbing a hill, you may put the automatic transmission into a gear for climbing, and otherwise you will put it into forward. And these gears will spontaneously change when you put them into those particular gears. In park, it remains parked. While climbing a hill and you put it in lower for climbing, you will find that the car will also change automatically within itself for climbing the hill. And then when you are on the freeway and you put it in forward, the car will shift automatically into gear so that you are moving forward with the least possible effort. Similarly, you have Tamagun, which is like park for rest. You have Rajagun, which is like climbing where effort is required. And you have Sattva Gun, which is for harmony, for peace, for knowledge, for happiness. But all problems start when you start thinking you are the gunas. When you misidentify with the gunas, then all your problems begin. For example, if you have stayed awake at night, even though your gunas have told you that you should sleep, you have been out partying, you have become Ratka Raja. Then in your office hours, during your professional work hours, during your business hours, you will be drowsy and you will be sleepy and you will not be functioning optimally. And people will say, oh, wo to abhi tamoguni ho gaya. Similarly, when you are in Rajagun and you misidentify with that Rajagun, thinking, I am that Rajaguna, then you are filled with desires, with lust, with greed, with envy. You desire to get things within the world. You want fruits of your labor. You're filled with greed and you're filled with anger when you're frustrated. So the same Rajaguna which brings about activity, when you identify with it and think you are that Rajaguna or you are that Prakriti, you go into lust, anger, and greed. Trividham narakasya idam dwaram nashanam atmanah kama krodha tatha lobas tasmadeta trayam tejet. Lust, anger, and greed, these are the three gates to hell, and every wise man must avoid them. Every wise man should avoid them. This is very important to understand. Similarly, when you get into Sattva Guna, Sattva Guna by itself is perfect. It allows you to acquire knowledge. Most important of all is spiritual knowledge. It allows you to attain harmony. It brings about peace. But when you think that you are Prakriti, that same Sattva Guna becomes self-satisfaction. It becomes complacence. It becomes the idea that I am the most spiritual person. I am the most happy person. And thus you become unaware of your surroundings and what is really happening within the world. Because you are attached to two things with Sattva Guna. You are attached to happiness and you are attached to knowledge. So as long as you are acquiring knowledge, you are happy. And as long as you're happy, that's the way you want to be. So this is Sattva Guna. It doesn't let you function as you want to function when you identify with it, when you misidentify with it. But Krishna wants you to transcend these three gunas. He wants you to realize that you are but the observer and that Prakriti is doing everything under the connection, under the control of Bhagavan. Mayadhyakshena Prakriti suyate sacharacharam hetunanena kaunteya jagad viparivartate. You have to understand that Krishna controls everything through Prakriti. Tena vina tranamapi na chalati, Brihadaranyaka Upanishad says. Not a blade of grass moves without God's consent. So you stop offering resistance to Krishna's energy. You stop trying to control it. You become the observer. And to become the observer, you have to be focused and attached to God. This Krishna will point out in the conclusion of this chapter, where he says, Mam chayo avyabhicharena bhakti yogena sevate sa gunan samatityetan brahma bhuya kalpate. That when you are engaged without any distraction, without any deviation, avyabhicharani, ananya bhakti, then Krishna says you will transcend these three gunas. And when you transcend these three gunas, what happens? When you transcend these three gunas, you observe both sattvagun, rajagun, and tamagun as an observer. Prakasham cha pravrittim cha mohameva cha pandava na dveshati sampravritani na nivritani kankshati. You are not attached to sattvagun, you are not opposed to tamagun, and you are indifferent also to rajagun. The gunas act perfectly, appropriately, under the guidance of Krishna, who is the controller. You remain the observer, and you stop misidentifying with Prakriti because you are constantly absorbed in God in avyabhicharena ananya bhakti. I have given you a summary of what the gunas are all about. They are perfect in themselves, but when you misidentify with them, then they lead to all kinds of imperfect outcomes. But when you realize that your job is to be focused on God and let God do everything through this Prakriti which you have, then you will realize that indeed this world is functioning perfectly and all your actions are appropriate and directed by God. So I will pause here. If you have any queries or questions, please feel free to ask me.
Thank you so much for today's session, Shantnuji. My first question is, in today's fast-paced world, which is dominated by ambition and stress, are we overly influenced by Rajas, Gun, and how can one consciously shift towards Sattva?
See, this is a common illusion, a great foolishness, which you will see even in spiritual societies, where people will tell you, don't be in Tamagun, you be in Sattvagun, don't be in Rajagun, be in Sattvagun. This is idiocy, because Krishna has already pointed out that if you try to struggle with these gunas, you will only suffer further and further. So, your problem is not Rajagun or Sattvagun or Tamagun. Your problem is that you are misidentifying with these gunas. So, don't try to change one guna into another. That's not your job. That happens automatically. If you have an automatic transmission in your car and then you try to use it like an ordinary stick shift, trying to move into second, third, fourth, fifth, like that, you will destroy your gear system. So don't try to change your gunas. These gunas operate automatically. You stand apart from the gunas and let the gunas act. If you are drowsy or sleepy, don't say this is tamagun, I have to overcome it. No. If tamagun desires rest and sleep, take rest and sleep. If your rajagun is active, you need to be active within the world. You need to go to the gym. You need to go to work. You need to engage in activity. You don't have to sit down in meditation when activity is required. And there is a time for all of these. There's a time for sattvagun, there's a time for rajagun, there's a time for tamagun. It's because you identify with the gunas and because you are misidentifying with these gunas, you are activating these gunas at the wrong times. Physiologically, your body is structured by the gunas. And if you sleep in time, if you get up in time, the gunas will automatically fall in place. They will automatically fall in place. Let the gunas be under the control of Krishna. You don't try to change from one guna to another. This is a common foolishness I have seen in even spiritual societies. Oh, you're in Tamagun. Let me get you into a Rajagun. That is wrong, so wrong. Because you don't realize that you cannot wrestle with the gunas. It is like wrestling with your own shadow. Is that clear?
Right. And my next question is if you had to summarize the Gita's wisdom on the gunas in one guiding thought for modern viewers, what would it be?
Simply, gunas are perfect and under the control of Krishna. Don't misidentify with them. Stand apart as the observer. Remain absorbed in God.
All right. Thank you so much, Shantnuji, for today's enlightening session. To our viewers, if you liked it too, then do share this video with your loved ones. Also, stay tuned as we meet again on next Thursday at 8 a.m. for another session on the Bhagavad Gita.
So, Jai
Hare
Shri Krishna, Hare Krishna, Hari Om.